The hidden reason God delays your breakthrough, almost nobody understands this. What if the silence you've been calling a delay is actually one of the greatest acts of love God has ever shown you? You check your phone, nothing. You check your bank account, same number. You lie awake and ask God the same question you asked last month and last year. You've stopped saying it out loud now. You just carry it. Abraham waited. Joseph waited. Moses waited. David waited. Even Jesus waited before he raised Lazarus from the dead. Today, you're going to see the real reason behind every one of those delays. There are 5 of them. And the last one is the one almost nobody understands. Before we go further, type one word in the comments for what you're waiting on right now. Just one word. I'll be reading these. Because what you're about to hear will change the way you see every quiet season of your life. Here's the truth we need to start with. Delay is not denial, and it is never neglect. And there is a reason we start with Abraham, because his story is not just the first waiting season in Scripture. It is the pattern for everyone that comes after it. If you understand what happened to him, you will understand what is happening to you. Reason 1. Abraham heard the promise at 75 years old. Genesis 12:2. God said, "I will make of thee a great nation." He believed it that day. He packed up everything he owned for it. He said goodbye to the only home he'd ever known, for a promise he couldn't see, and a country he'd never visited. And then nothing happened. Not for a year. Not for 5 years. Not for 10. Sarah started counting birthdays. She didn't want to count anymore. Abraham started walking past the idea of a son, the way you walk past a room in your house you've stopped going into. He didn't talk about it as much, but he thought about it every single day. 25 years passed between the promise and the child. 25 years is not a short trial. It is most of a working life. It is long enough to bury friends. Long enough to watch your own strength start to fade while the thing you were promised still hasn't arrived. Genesis 15:6 tells us what was happening on the inside during those years. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. Notice the order. The believing came before the child, not after. And Hebrews 11:11 adds something the Genesis account only implies that Sarah herself judged him faithful, who had promised. That faith wasn't just Abraham's private conviction. It became something both of them had to hold together, year after year, with nothing yet to show for it. God was not withholding Isaac because Abraham wasn't ready to be a father. Fathering is not complicated. Any man can father a child in a single night. What God was building was something slower and rarer. A faith that didn't need proof in order to keep standing. Think of it like a tree planted near a riverbank. The tree doesn't grow strong roots in a single season of rain. It grows them across years of drought, sending itself deeper into the ground precisely because the surface water isn't there to depend on. Abraham's roots went down for 25 years before the fruit ever showed up on the branch. By the time Isaac was born, Abraham was not just a man with a son. He was a man who had learned to trust God with his whole life, not just his whole calendar. That is reason 1. But the next one is the one nobody talks about. Stay with me here because Joseph's waiting looked nothing like Abraham's, and that matters more than you think. Reason 2. A 17-year-old boy has a dream. Genesis 37. His own brothers throw him into a pit and leave him there to die slowly, in the dark, listening to them eat lunch a few feet away. Then, they change their minds and sell him into slavery instead as if that were mercy. He's dragged to Egypt, sold again, rebuilds a life as a servant in Potiphar's house, only to be falsely accused by a woman who wanted what she couldn't have and thrown into a prison for a crime he never committed. 13 years pass between the dream and the throne. 13 years of sleeping on a stone floor with no name, no rights, no idea if anyone back home even remembers his face. 13 years of hearing footsteps outside his cell and hoping, every single time, that today someone finally remembered him and watching the footsteps walk past. Psalm 105:19 says something easy to read past too quickly. Until the time that his word came, the word of the Lord tried him. The word translated tried here is the Hebrew word saraf. It's a smelting word. It's what a metal worker does to silver, holding it over fire. Not to destroy it, but to burn off everything that isn't silver, until only the pure metal remains, and the refiner can finally see his own reflection in it. God wasn't punishing Joseph in that prison. He was refining him. Genesis 41-39 shows us the result. Pharaoh looks at this same prisoner and says, "There is none so discreet and wise as thou art." That wisdom didn't appear the moment Joseph walked out of the cell. It was forged inside it. Because the Joseph who could forgive his brothers at the end, the one who wept and said, "Ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good," in Genesis 50-20 could never have survived being handed a throne at 17. A boy with that much power and that much bitterness would have destroyed a nation. The pit didn't just hold him back. It shaped what kind of ruler he would become. Not by accident, not by mistake, by design. If you believe that God is not late but preparing, type it with me right now. He is not late, he is preparing. Write it in the comments. Let it be a declaration, not just a thought you agree with quietly. That's Abraham. That's Joseph. Two very different waiting seasons, one stretched out slow like a drought, one crushed down hard like fire on metal. But underneath both of them, the same hand was at work. Reason 3. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace. Fine clothes, royal tutors. Every door in Egypt open to him. Acts 7:22 says he was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds. By every human measure, he was already prepared to lead. At 40 years old, he tried to use that strength. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and he killed the man with his own hands. Exodus 2:11-1-2 tells us that he could rescue his people by force. Acts 7:25 adds something painful. It says Moses supposed his brethren would understand that God was using him to deliver them. They didn't. Word got out. Pharaoh wanted him dead. And the prince of Egypt became a fugitive, running for his life into the desert. He spent the next 40 years there, not leading a nation, herding sheep for his father-in-law Jethro, waking up to the same dry hills every morning. No crowds, no title, no one calling his name. Picture that for a moment, a man who once walked palace halls, now counting sheep at sundown to make sure none had wandered off in the night. The same hands that once held a prince's authority now smelled of wool and dust. Exodus 3:1 tells us exactly where he was when God finally spoke. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert. The backside. Not the front, not the visible place, the forgotten corner of a forgotten land. That is where the burning bush appeared. Exodus 3:10 is where the call finally comes. Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh. 40 years after his first attempt to save his people, God finally sends him not with a sword this time, but with a staff and a stutter. Most churches never walk through this part. They jump straight from the burning bush to the Red Sea and skip the 40 silent years in between. But those years were not wasted time. They were the whole preparation. The man who tried to deliver Israel with his own hands had killed a man and made things worse. The man who finally led 2 million people out of slavery had first spent 4 decades learning how to lead sheep through a wilderness he didn't control, trusting a landscape he couldn't master, depending on a strength that wasn't his own. God didn't need Moses to be mighty in words and deeds anymore. He needed him empty enough to say, "Who am I?" in Exodus 3:11, and mean it. Not by accident, not by mistake, by design. Stay with me here, because what happened to David next is the part most people skip past too quickly. Reason 4. Samuel anointed David king when he was still a boy watching sheep in his father's field. 1 Samuel 16:13. Oil poured over his head in front of his own brothers. A prophet's hand on his shoulder. A future already spoken over him, in front of witnesses, while he still smelled like the pasture. And then, nothing happened the way you'd expect. No coronation. No throne. Instead, years of running, sleeping in caves with dirt for a bed, eating whatever his men could find, listening for footsteps in the dark because King Saul wanted him dead, and Saul had an army, and David had a few hundred men hiding in the hills of En-Gedi. 1 Samuel 24 shows us something remarkable in the middle of that season. David has Saul cornered, alone, in a cave, a clean shot at the throne God already promised him. And he doesn't take it. He cuts a piece of Saul's robe instead, and even that small act troubles his conscience. The anointed one, hunted like a criminal, refuses to force open the door God had already promised to open. 2 Samuel 5-4 tells us David was 30 years old when he finally began to reign. Anointed as a boy in a field, crowned as a man on a throne. In between roughly 15 years of learning what it meant to trust God's timing, when he had every opportunity, every justification, to take the crown by his own hand. Psalm 27-14, written by David himself, carries the weight of those years in a single line. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. That is not a verse from a man who waited easily. That is a verse from a man who learned to wait the hard way and lived to tell you it was worth it. If God had crowned him the same week he was anointed, Israel would have gotten a shepherd boy with a title and no scars to prove what he'd trust God through. Instead, the waiting gave them a king after God's own heart. Acts 13:22. This is the midpoint of our message today, and if this teaching has meant something to you, take a second to subscribe. It helps this reach the next person sitting in their own waiting room tonight. Because we're not done. The biggest reveal is still ahead. If you're starting to see the pattern in your own life right now, say it with me one more time. He is not late. He is preparing. Type it in the comments. Let it be the thing you're standing on today, not just something you read. Reason 5. This is the one that changes everything. Jesus gets word that his close friend Lazarus is sick, not a stranger, not an acquaintance. Someone he loved. John 11:5 tells us plainly. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. John 11:6 says, when he had heard therefore that he was sick, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. Read that again. He heard, and he stayed. The word translated abode here is the Greek word meno. It doesn't mean he got delayed by circumstance. It means he deliberately remained. He chose to stay exactly where he was, with the news of his friend's sickness sitting in front of him, and he didn't move. Imagine getting that phone call, the one that makes your stomach drop, and then deliberately choosing not to leave for 2 more days. That's what love did here. Not because love didn't care, because love saw further down the road than fear could see. Lazarus died during those 2 days. His sisters, Mary and Martha, watched him take his last breath, while Jesus, the one who could have healed him with a single word from a distance, the way he'd healed the centurion's servant in Matthew 8, stayed away on purpose. When Jesus finally arrives, Martha meets him on the road and says the words so many of us have said in our own way. Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. John 11:21. It's not an accusation. It's grief looking for an explanation. And here is the truth almost nobody understands. Jesus wasn't late. He was aiming at something bigger than a healing. He was aiming at a resurrection. John 11:4 tells us, he said it plainly before he ever left. This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. If he had come when they first called, Lazarus would have been healed from sickness. Because he waited, Lazarus was raised from the dead in front of a crowd of mourners, and everyone watching saw the glory of God in a way a simple healing at a distance could never have shown them. This is the hidden reason behind every delay you have ever carried. God is not choosing between helping you and loving you. Sometimes the delay itself is the deepest form of the help. He is not aiming at the smallest miracle available to him. He is aiming at the one that will actually hold. Habakkuk 2-3 says it plainly. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Notice the contrast built into that verse itself. It tarries, and then, in the very same breath, it will surely come. Scripture doesn't pretend the waiting isn't real. It sets the delay and the certainty side by side, on purpose, so you'd hold both at once. The tarrying is honest, but it is never the final word. He is not late. He is preparing. Before we close, I want to ask you something. What is the one thing from today's teaching you most needed to hear? Was it Abraham, Joseph, Moses, David, or Lazarus? Share it in the comments below. Your answer might be the exact encouragement someone else scrolling through today needs to read. So if you are still in the waiting tonight, if the door hasn't opened, the healing hasn't come, the answer hasn't arrived, I want you to hear this clearly. Abraham wasn't forgotten. Joseph wasn't forgotten. Moses wasn't forgotten in the backside of that desert. David wasn't forgotten in that cave, and Lazarus's sisters, weeping at that tomb, were not forgotten either. Every one of them stood in a silence that felt like absence, and every one of them later understood that the silence had been full the entire time, full of a hand still working, even when it couldn't be seen. God isn't withholding your breakthrough because He doesn't see you. He is preparing the version of you that can actually carry it, and He is aiming at something bigger than the thing you're asking for. Delay is not denial. It never has been. If this reached you tonight, share it with someone in their own waiting season. They might need to hear, today, that heaven has not gone silent. He is not late. He is preparing.